Hebrews chapter 1 describes Jesus as one with God. Hebrews chapter 2 tells about Jesus becoming a human being and dying. Chapter 3 and the remainder of the book describes how Jesus has been exalted and taken the position as high priest and priestly king in the heavenly sanctuary. Welcome to yet another tidbit from the Bible. We move into the first quarter of 2022, and our topic this quarter is the Epistle to the Hebrews. We have 13 chapters in this book. We have 13 weeks, so I will be simple in the sense that I will deal with one chapter at a time. So today let's look, even within this larger context of the book, let's look at chapter 1. And let's read its majestic beginning, the introduction in the first 4 verses. And I'm reading from the International Standard Version. This is how it goes. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. In Greek, this is one long sentence. And compared with other New Testament letters and letters of the time, this is different. There are no personal greetings. There's no wish or prayer for the audience. In a sense, this is less a letter and more like a homily. This is what would be expected by an intelligent, well-educated reader when reading a philosophical or ethical treatise. It is elegant. It makes use of a number of literary devices, phonetic devices. A number of the words in the first line begins with the letter P or pi, that is the P sound. And it is structured also chiastically so that the middle of this wonderful introduction is the description of the being of Jesus. The Son is the radiance of God's glories, the exact representation of his being, presenting what he is. And before that you have what God has done, and after that you have what the Son is doing or will be doing. And then the author, with this introduction, presents, as was expected, the major issues that he will deal with in the book that follows. Let's look at some of them. First, he emphasizes a fact of revelation, that is, God has spoken, the presence of the Word. This is a major theme that you will find through the rest of the book. Next, he presents Jesus as the Son, that is the representative, the unique representative of God. This is also a theme that runs through the book. Jesus is the Son of God's house, as therefore the heir. And this is the next one. As the Son, he is the heir, and if you believe in Jesus, you are co-heir with him. You can follow this theme also through the book. Next, Jesus has provided purification. This is a reference to the atonement on the cross. The very basis of all the theological reflection that follows. The sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And finally, the last main thought that is represented here in this introduction, or emporium as it would be called, is that Jesus has been enthroned as the messianic priestly king in heaven, and therefore he can function as a high priest. And this is, of course, a major theme that we will follow as we move on in the book. But we will today concentrate on chapter 1. And what follows the introduction, this emporium, is a description where Jesus is compared with the angels. Throughout the book you will find one major theme that runs through it, that is, Jesus is better. He's better than prophets, he's better than Moses, he's better than the angels, he has a better sacrifice than in the Old Testament rituals, he is a better high priest, he is the heir of a better country, a better city, and so on. In this chapter, it's important for the writer to point to the fact that Jesus is better than the angels. Why? Now, one reason, of course, is the angels are very close to God. From a human perspective, they are almost divine beings. And this is what was the temptation. There were a number of people who were tempted to actually worship angels. In Revelation chapter 19, 10 and 22, verse 8 and 9, you have a scene where John the Apostle is tempted to fall down and worship his accompanying angel, and he is clearly told, you only worship God. The same thought is presented in the narration of the temptation in the wilderness. The devil is tempting Jesus to worship him, and Jesus answers, you are to worship God alone. The word that is used in this text is the Greek proskuneo. It also always has this meaning of worshipping. When you fall down here, you fall down to worship. In Acts chapter 10, verses 25 and 26 and onwards, Peter visits the Italian convert, the officer Cornelius. And Cornelius, when he meets Peter, falls first down to worship him, and Peter points to the fact, no, you should not do that. I'm only a human being. You only worship God. And then you read in verse 6 in chapter 1 in Hebrews, and again when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. So, Jesus is worshipped, and you only worship God. And he's worshipped by the angels, so he's far, far better, far more mightiful than they are. Let me add a few remarks on details here. The expression the firstborn here is a title taken from Psalm 89, a title for the Messianic King. And when in the previous verses it has been said that Jesus is the Son who has, and God has now become his Father, this is a formula for the intronization of the Davidic king. It has nothing to do with Jesus being created sometime in the past. This is his enthronement, his exaltation and enthronement in heaven as the Davidic king. And the angels then worship him. And it said, when God brings his firstborn into the world. And some would say, when is that? The term for world in this case is oikumene. And it is truly many times used about the generally inhabited world. However, this particular moment in time is not the incarnation, because he will move on, the author, in the next chapter to point out that in the incarnation, when Jesus became a human being, he was for a limited time lower than the angels. This is not this period. So as you look at the way that the words are used, you'll find that when Hebrews speaks about this inhabited world in general, about the incarnation, the world that fell into sin, the world that Jesus entered to save, he uses the word cosmos. One example is 10:5. Jesus enters the world to sacrifice himself on the cross. Here it is cosmos. So oikomene is rather describing the sphere into which Jesus went after his resurrection, at his ascension, when he entered and came into Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem that is spoken about in chapter 12 in Hebrews, where there are thousands of angels. These are the angels that worship. So in this Old Testament text, where the author is primarily following a translation very close to Septuagint and writing to people who would have that Greek version of the New Testament or of the Old Testament, he first describes the exaltation of the Son and the adoration and worship by the angels. Next, from verses 7 to 12, he makes it clear the angels are but created beings, Jesus is the creator. And finally, in verses 13 and 14, he takes some of the consequences of the enthronement of the Son, namely the service of the angels. They are to function as servants of the Son in the plan of salvation. He is their master. And this whole section with the comparison between Jesus and the angels are framed by a reference to Jesus at the right hand of God. Notice, if you have your Bible, in chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, after he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. And then you have the comparison with the angels. The similar phenomenon you find in verses 13 and 14. To which of the angels did God ever say, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? So, you have what scholars here call an inclusio, a frame around this line of argumentation. The frame is Jesus as at the right hand of the Father, and therefore he has the authority to send out the angels to serve his purpose. Notice, Jesus is sitting. That is not accidental. He sits on the throne at the right hand of the Father. The angels are standing. If you go back, for instance, and read in Daniel chapter 7, verse 10, 14, you will find that those who serve are standing ready to be sent. Those who sit are being served in this case. So Jesus is the master. He's far above the angels, whom he can send out to fulfill his purpose in the plan of salvation. And as we move into the next chapter, we will see some of the consequences of having a God who is willing to become a human being and to die for us. And the Hebrews will begin with the admonition, "Let us therefore," inviting you to take the consequences of the theology and outlive it in your daily Christian life. Thank you for listening to this first tidbit of the most exciting book, or one of the most exciting books of the New Testament, the Epistle to the Hebrews, as we move through chapter by chapter in the first quarter of 2022.